They came without warning, not with weapons drawn, but with declarations and documentation, pages of interstellar law, charts, and conquest records. Humanity had barely tasted the stars when the Galactic Empire descended. Their ships were impossibly large, drifting above the planet like silent judges. Communications weren't a request, but a directive. The message was simple: Earth had been discovered, catalogued, and would be peacefully integrated into the Empire's sprawling bureaucracy. There was no offer, only compliance. Resistance, they said, was inefficient. Across Earth's scattered governments, urgency crackled through encrypted lines. At first, the response was confusion, then unease, then calculation. Earth had fought empires before. This one simply didn't fly flags or plant boots. Instead, it delivered ultimatums in pristine, emotionless standard Galactic. They didn't come to kill. They came to convert. The Empire wasn't new to this. Hundreds of species had joined, or been absorbed. Their process was surgical, legalistic, and total. Cultures were archived, industries redirected, militaries dissolved. In time, entire civilizations forgot they were once sovereign. The Empire had no need to destroy what it could smother with contracts. To them, Earth was just the next folder in the archive. Another primitive world needing direction. Their arrogance was practiced, refined over centuries. Earth's first delegation was received not with hostility, but mild condescension. Tall, pale-skinned bureaucrats from the Alexari caste looked down with practiced detachment. They praised Earth's nascent potential and assured a smooth transition. A token seat in a planetary council would be awarded. Human education systems would be upgraded, code for standardized. Earth's cultures, religions, and economies would be harmonized into galactic norms. Resistance was framed not as courage but as irrationality. The Empire wasn't cruel, just cold. The humans listened. They nodded, took notes. The Empire interpreted this as submission. It wasn't. What they didn't understand was simple: humanity had met empires before. Mongols, Romans, Ottomans, British, Soviet, corporate, digital. Earth was a graveyard of former rulers. Each time, the people fought, fractured, adapted. Empires rose, declared eternity, then vanished like breath on glass. The Empire's mistake wasn't showing power. It was assuming that humanity had never seen it before. In private, Earth's response teams worked with clinical speed. Military analysts ran simulations. Economists mapped trade implications. Sociologists dissected the Empire's caste hierarchies, psychological levers, and propaganda patterns. Hackers traced the transmission protocols in the Empire's language packs. Linguists found subtle inconsistencies in how they used authority. And everywhere, quietly, the same conclusion formed: this was not a war of weapons. This was a war of frameworks, of belief. The Empire's ambassadors, if they noticed any of this, didn't show it. They operated like machines. Empathy wasn't required. They had no concept of unpredictability, because it had been centuries since anyone surprised them. And then humanity did what it always does when backed into a corner: it got weird. Earth's first formal reply wasn't a declaration of resistance. It wasn't even aggressive. It was a historical montage 3 hours long, broadcast not only in Standard Galactic, but in dozens of translated dialects used across the Empire. It started with cave paintings and ended with Hiroshima. It covered every atrocity, every rebellion, every accidental genius. It showed pyramids, war crimes, moon landings, jazz, and memes. It played on every screen the Empire would allow. It wasn't edited to inspire. It was edited to unsettle. The narrator, a calm, composed historian, delivered the final lines without inflection: "We are humanity. We don't conquer because we must. We rebel because we can. Every chain forged for us has broken. Every master who called themselves our better has become dust. We've burned our skies, killed our gods, and stood again. We are irrational. We are unstable. We are impossible to predict. And we are ready to negotiate." To some on Earth, it was a gamble. To others, a declaration. But to the Empire, it was noise. They didn't understand art, symbolism, or defiance wrapped in civility. They dismissed it as a cultural quirk. That was their second mistake. Beneath the surface, Earth's response was unified, strategic, and designed to seem disorganized. Publicly, Earth held summits and appeared divided. Secretly, a new protocol was enacted: nonlinear resistance. Military engagement was ruled out, for now. Instead, the plan was simple. Appear harmless. Stay underestimated. Let the Empire write the script, then flip it. Human representatives attended every meeting. They smiled, asked naive questions, offered concessions, signed minor treaties that meant nothing. In private, they dissected every alien they spoke to: voice pitch, gesture timing, blink frequency. Intelligence wasn't just gathering data, it was profiling psychology. The Empire thought they were dealing with infants. In reality, they were watching a species that had learned to hide knives in lullabies. And then came the tests. Small probes sent toward Imperial satellites. Harmless signal pings aimed at mapping vulnerabilities. Civilian broadcasters accidentally crossed frequencies with Empire channels. Human children started using Imperial standard as slang. Talk shows joked about the Galactic landlords. A sitcom pilot mocked the Empire's caste structure and went viral. The Empire's systems couldn't process satire. There was no legal precedent for insult through irony. Still, they stayed calm. Or they pretended to. Their third mistake was assuming humanity's erraticism was a flaw. It wasn't. It was armor. On paper, Earth was a primitive anomaly, barely interstellar, fractured politically, emotionally volatile. But under the surface, humanity was a bomb wired not to explode in violence, but in meaning. And the timer had just been set. The Empire expected awe, maybe silence, possibly tears. What they got instead was a projector, a straight-backed human diplomat, and a room that dimmed without permission. They had asked for a cultural summary. The human delegation obliged. The first slide: Blood on Snow, Stalingrad, 1942. The narrator's voice was clear, emotionless. This is what we do when cornered. Slide 2: Burning Cityscapes, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This is what we do when provoked. Slide 3: Footprints on the Moon. This is what we do when told it's impossible. No embellishment, no grandstanding, just blunt facts delivered with surgical precision. The aliens shifted, uncomfortable, uncertain whether they were witnessing a threat or a lesson. Empires forget how wars start. They forget that desperation sharpens genius. Humanity didn't build an empire through peace. It didn't evolve by surrendering. Every era of human progress was soaked in conflict, contradiction, and the refusal to kneel. The Empire believed order was strength. Humanity showed them chaos as evolution. The humans recited no myths. They spoke of revolutions: the American, the French, the digital. They spoke of leaders who rose from nothing, and tyrants who fell to whispers. They explained trench warfare, guerrilla resistance, the logic of mad, mutually assured destruction. The aliens struggled to understand why any species would build weapons they hoped never to use. Humanity explained that survival sometimes meant doing the unthinkable first. A chart appeared: human population over time, marked by plagues, wars, recoveries. Alien analysts had seen the data. What they hadn't grasped was what it meant: that humanity had been destroyed repeatedly and never stayed down. The graph didn't show stability. It showed defiance. A species allergic to permanence, addicted to reinvention. One alien official interrupted. "This is glorification of violence." The human nodded. "No. This is the cost of freedom." The room fell quiet. The next segment was less bloody, but more dangerous. It focused on ideas. Humans didn't just invent tools, they invented philosophies that turned against themselves. Communism, capitalism, anarchism, existentialism. Each one tested, broken, rebuilt, forgotten, resurrected. Where the Empire streamlined belief for control, humans fractured theirs to explore. Faith, doubt, absurdity, these weren't flaws. They were fuel. Alien minds, built on collective efficiency, struggled with contradiction. Humans breathed it. The diplomats smiled as they described satire, dark humor, irony, sarcasm. "We insult ourselves to stay sane," they explained. The Empire had no concept of a joke that cut deep and healed afterward. A montage followed: humans failing. Challenger, Chernobyl, the Dust Bowl, Vietnam. But each failure was paired with the aftermath: safety protocols, treaties, reformation, art. Not triumph from perfection. Triumph from ruin. No other species in the Empire's archives had treated disaster as raw material. Humanity mined tragedy for progress. Then came culture, music, literature, cinema. Beethoven, Maya Angelou, George Orwell, Tupac, Spielberg. Not for entertainment, but for what they revealed. Human stories weren't about power or victory. They were about resistance, identity, irony, survival. Even in fiction, humans dreamed of enemies greater than themselves, and imagined ways to win. Or when losing, to remain human. The Empire had studied human wars. They hadn't studied human dreams. The diplomat changed gears. "You think we're fragmented," they said. "We are. That's why we survive. No single virus kills every cell." The metaphor went over many heads, but not all. A few aliens exchanged glances. Someone understood. Another official asked why humans hadn't colonized more. "Because we were too busy fighting ourselves," the diplomat replied. "And learning from it." The honesty wasn't weakness. It was warning. The Empire had tried to catalog humanity through statistics: carbon emissions, GDP, military capacity. They'd ignored poetry, rebellion, counterculture. They didn't understand why a tattooed teenager quoting Orwell in a burned-out city mattered more than a general in a clean uniform. But humans did. They always had. The historian didn't end with a flourish. They ended with a whisper. "You measure us by what you can control. But our greatest power is what you can't predict. We are not what you expect. And we never will be." The silence was thick. Outside that chamber, the video didn't stay contained. Despite Empire firewalls, it spread. Alien World saw images of humans shouting, singing, bleeding, laughing in ruins. Not conquering. Enduring. That difference mattered. To the average citizen in the Empire, Earth had been a curiosity. Now it was a paradox. Dangerous, yet magnetic. Primitive, yet profound. Even the Empire's younger species, those still forming identity, began asking questions. Why was Earth different? Why did their art make you feel something wrong and right at once? It wasn't the data that shook the Empire. It was the reaction. Earth's video made people feel. And feelings, in a rigid empire, were poison. Imperial analysts scrambled to explain. They called it a primitive psychological maneuver. They said it lacked strategic merit. But they couldn't stop talking about it. Even those who dismissed it watched it twice. Some aliens watched it with their children. Some started questioning their own curated history. A few called it subversive. Others called it beautiful. And all the while, humanity said nothing more. The Empire didn't know it yet, but they'd already lost the first engagement. Not in orbit, not with weapons, but in a quiet room with a story they didn't understand. And worse, couldn't control. The Empire requested a demonstration. Not as a test, but a formality. Earth was to display its military capabilities so they could be catalogued, assessed, and properly dismissed. They expected fireworks, outdated missiles, maybe some crude orbital ships. The humans, smiling politely, agreed. The demonstration began with a digital simulation, not a show of brute force, but a real-time wargame. On one screen, a fleet of Empire-pattern cruisers advanced. On the other, Earth deployed a minimal force: drones, a handful of frigates, AI-operated skirmish units. The scenario was absurdly unfair. Within 5 minutes, the simulation flipped. Human assets flanked the cruisers, exploited weak points in their formation, and fractured their command chain. On replay, analysts noticed patterns, decisions made in milliseconds, improvisations alien AIs never attempted. The simulation wasn't about power. It was about unpredictability. The aliens remained unimpressed. Simulations could be manipulated. They wanted something tangible. Earth complied. Next came a joint drone trial. Empire and Earth machines in neutral airspace. Empire bots were massive, armored, designed for precision. Earth's were small, cheap, fast. In less than 10 minutes, every Empire drone was grounded, not destroyed, just immobilized. Joints jammed, sensors blinded, network connections severed. No shots fired. The Empire demanded an explanation. A human engineer shrugged. We taught ours to cheat. Empire commanders struggled to process the logic. To them, war was linear, superiority through scale and standardization. To Earth, war was adaptation. Asymmetry wasn't a limitation. It was an advantage. Then came the stealth test. Empire ships used conventional field cloaking, high-energy dampeners, and gravity shielding. Earth had one ship, barely larger than a cargo freighter. It vanished from radar without a cloak. No radiation signature. No movement. Then, 15 minutes into the test, an alert triggered on the Empire flagship. The Earth vessel had docked without clearance. No one had seen it approach. Security panicked, systems scrambled. But the ship hadn't hacked in. It had simply slipped through blind spots the Empire didn't know it had. Their protocols were built to detect logic. Humanity had mastered a logic. The breach wasn't aggressive. It was theatrical. Inside the flagship's hangar, the Earth crew left a small box. Inside it, a single USB drive labeled "Found You." The Empire tried to brush it off. But the logs couldn't be erased. Every species in the Empire saw it. Their grandest warship fooled by a vessel they didn't take seriously. Still, Earth wasn't done. The next exhibit wasn't a battle. It was logistics. Empire supply chains operated through predictable schedules. Human supply lines operated on chaos. They demonstrated a network of decentralized AI-driven cargo relays that could adapt routes in real time based on threat analysis, weather, fuel supply, and political conditions. An Empire official scoffed. Too messy. But another, more experienced admiral, leaned forward. He saw what the others didn't. Flexibility wasn't disorganization. It was resilience. Earth's final move wasn't technological at all. It was cognitive. They invited the Empire's tactical AI, designed over centuries, unbeaten in simulations, to play a game. Not war. Go. The human champion wasn't a general, but a teenager from Nairobi. The AI lost in under 30 minutes. Reviewers found the strategy incoherent, impossible to replicate. Human instinct had outmaneuvered cold probability. In the debrief, a senior Empire strategist asked what lesson Earth intended to teach. The human lead responded with a question. How do you fight someone who doesn't play by rules you can recognize? The silence was long. Afterward, among themselves, Empire officials tried to regain footing. They called Earth's approach erratic, unsustainable, dangerous. But none could deny what they'd seen. Earth didn't fight harder. It fought differently. Their war wasn't against machines or fleets, it was against expectations. And expectations were the Empire's greatest weakness. Later, a minor report leaked, an internal Empire memo summarizing the demonstration. One line caught attention: they treat war like jazz, improvised, unpredictable, and always offbeat. It's not elegance. It's madness that works. The memo was buried. That night, across Empire networks, a new term trended. Not an official label, just a slang used by junior officers, ghost tacticians. It referred to humans. The term was banned within days. Humanity didn't celebrate. They didn't gloat. They didn't need to. The Empire had asked for a demonstration. What they got was an education in discomfort. Not from superior firepower, but from the realization that power, real power, wasn't always visible. Sometimes it was the hand you didn't see moving the board. The Empire came expecting primitives with sticks and sparks. What they found was a species that fought with ideas, glitches, unpredictability, and nerve. And for the first time in centuries, they left uncertain. Not because Earth was strong, but because Earth made them feel something they hadn't felt in generations: doubt. The first crack wasn't in armor or systems. It was in pride. Following the demonstration, Earth's performance became a subject of quiet, uneasy discussions across the Empire. The upper castes called it a fluke, a spectacle, irrelevant in true warfare. But behind closed doors, something deeper stirred. They had been made to look clumsy, predictable. And in a hierarchy obsessed with control, that was intolerable. It happened during what was supposed to be a routine diplomatic summit. An Alexei overseer, third echelon, questioned Earth's role. His words weren't chosen carefully. He referred to humans as barely civilized animals dressed in stolen technology. The room went still. The insult wasn't shocking, it was expected from those bred in entitlement, but it was spoken publicly, recorded, and translated across 100 networks. The human representative didn't raise his voice. He didn't retaliate. He smiled. "If we're animals," he said, "you should be more worried that we learned your language in under 2 months and have already figured out which of your officials can be bribed, which ones lie under stress, and which of you still haven't told your own people what we did to your flagship security protocols." The silence afterward wasn't just awkward. It was cold and heavy. The Empire attempted to suppress the broadcast. But Earth didn't need their channels. Within hours, the footage was remixed, captioned, dubbed, and distributed across human platforms. The insult became a meme. So did the reply. Interstellar news feeds saw it as trivial at first, until alien civilians, especially from species subjugated long ago, began sharing it, laughing, nodding. For many, it was the first time they saw anyone mock the Empire without consequence. Then came the video. Someone on Earth, identity still unknown, spliced the insult with centuries of Earth protest footage. Tank Man. Martin Luther King's speeches. Women burning headscarves. Ukrainian defenders flipping off warships. Over all of it, the aliens' words echoed, barely civilized animals. Then, silence. And a final message, maybe. But animals bite. It exploded across networks. The Empire responded with denials, declarations, and censors. But the message had already spread to places their authority couldn't reach. In the underlayers of the galactic net, humans became something more than a nuisance. They became a symbol. They weren't trying to fight the Empire in space. They were undermining it through perception, through narrative. They were changing how others saw power. A second wave of reaction came not from civilians, but from military analysts. Internal Empire memos revealed a concerning pattern. Morale among junior officers was dropping. Not due to Earth's weapons, but its attitude. Earth didn't posture. It didn't kneel. It didn't take anything seriously except strategy. For a culture built on solemn rituals of hierarchy, this casual defiance was like acid, slow, corrosive, impossible to stop. And then humanity did the unthinkable again. They released a short documentary titled "Symmetry is Weakness." It broke down, frame by frame, the Empire's obsession with perfection, how their architecture, their fleets, their governance, all relied on rigid design and uniformity. The final line was delivered by a child: "We win because we don't need to be perfect. Just faster, weirder, and a little louder." The Empire couldn't find a single military code that banned psychological warfare through humor. It had simply never been considered. In response, Earth released an anthology of alien jokes, translated into standard Galactic, formatted like ancient Terran comedies. The joke titles were benign, but the content was precise satire. Why did the Empire commander cross the line? Because he didn't check for mines on the other side. The message was clear. Earth didn't fear the Empire. Earth laughed at it. This wasn't propaganda. It was provocation. And it worked. A top-level Empire communication leaked, marked eyes only. The memo was titled, "Human Cultural Weaponization Patterns." It listed music, language, digital media, and comedy as non-conventional armaments with destabilizing effects. It wasn't meant for public view. But when it leaked, Earth didn't deny it. They turned it into a commercial. The commercial aired across human networks like a fashion ad. Models wore shirts with a memo printed on them. Merch followed. Stickers. Hoodies. Graffiti across captured satellite shells. Weaponized culture became a brand. The Empire's pride took another hit. Their most powerful strength, the illusion of dominance, was dissolving. They couldn't strike back without proving the point. Every overreaction validated Earth's mockery. Alien youth, especially those from oppressed species, started adopting Earth slang. Earth fashion. Earth music. Some even began studying human languages, not for communication, but for rebellion. Earth became less a planet and more a virus of ideas. Wherever their message reached, something broke. Not violently. Quietly, Empire officials warned of contamination. Human ideology is incompatible with galactic order, they said. But it was too late. Earth had changed the game. The battlefield wasn't in orbit anymore. It was inside minds. To make matters worse, Earth sent a philosopher to the next summit. Not a general. Not a scientist. Just a man with gray hair and a slow voice. He spoke of entropy, of why rigid structures always fall, and why laughter is the first sign of collapse in an old system. He ended with a quote, "We don't tear you down. We show you the mirror. The rest happens on its own." The Empire had demanded respect. What they received was a reflection, and they didn't like what stared back. No shots fired. No invasions. No superweapons. Just ideas sharpened into needles. And every prick drew blood. The Empire couldn't tolerate being mocked. Not by primitives. Not by upstarts from an unstable planet barely crawling into interstellar relevance. The insult had festered too long, amplified by Earth's refusal to behave. The Empire believed its patience had been mistaken for weakness. They decided to reassert control, not with negotiation, but with a message only power could deliver. They called it a localized deterrence maneuver. Earth called it what it was: intimidation. Without a formal declaration, massive Empire carriers positioned themselves over Earth's major regions. Atmospheric interference darkened skies. Orbital pressure caused minor tidal shifts. City grids flickered. Sonic pulses rippled across oceans and cracked glaciers. Civilian channels were hijacked with repeated broadcasts. This is a reminder. The Galactic Empire ensures order. Accept your place. It wasn't subtle. It was brute flexing wrapped in protocol. They didn't need permission to remind Earth where it stood in the cosmic hierarchy. But something went wrong. The Empire expected panic. Screaming. Evacuations. Mass hysteria. They got calm. Power grids stayed online. Emergency services functioned without chaos. No riots, no martial law. Earth didn't tremble. It blinked and moved forward. The Empire's strategy manual didn't have a chapter for that. What they didn't see, what they couldn't see, was that Earth had already gamed this out. Before the first ship darkened the sky, simulations had run. The response wasn't to shoot back. It was to let the Empire show its hand, and then fold it. Within minutes, anonymous human operators activated dormant backdoor links placed months earlier. While the Empire broadcast messages of dominance, Earth broadcast silence, directly into the Empire's systems. One by one, subtle malfunctions occurred across their fleet. Not weapons failures. Not shields. Just enough to fray nerves. Screens flickered. Communications scrambled. Navigation systems momentarily redirected routes to nowhere. Nothing permanent. Just enough to remind them they weren't untouchable. In orbit, one of the Empire's mid-range dreadnoughts began playing audio over its external comms. It wasn't from Earth's military. It was a pirated stream, an old Earth song looping with growing distortion. Is this the real life? Is this just fantasy? The lyrics echoed in a dozen languages. The ship's crew scrambled to stop it. They failed. 4 hours, that song haunted the fleet. Not offensive. Not lethal. Just unnerving. Alien crews filed formal complaints. The Empire labeled it psychological interference. Earth never claimed responsibility. Then came the data leak. Internal Empire memos, security protocols, and personal logs from high-ranking officers began circulating on Earth's networks. Leaks framed as satire. One memo, detailing instructions for planetary intimidation, was rebranded as a galactic dating guide and read aloud by comedians. The document went viral. Alien influencers reacted to it with mock interviews, laughter, and derision. The Empire lost not a ship, not a soldier, but something worse: narrative control. The breaking point came when Earth systems hijacked a ceremonial Empire broadcast, meant to commemorate a historic annexation of another world centuries earlier. Earth replaced the visuals with an edited timeline titled, "How to Lose a Galaxy in 10 Easy Steps." It mapped each of the Empire's major cultural blunders, ending with a flashing message: "Congratulations. You played yourself." The Empire's leadership was furious. They had come to Earth to re-establish fear. Instead, they had become a joke trending across 6 systems. But retaliation wasn't simple. The use of force required approval from the central directive. And the directive had grown cautious. Not because they feared Earth's weapons, but because Earth wasn't fighting conventionally. They were rewriting the entire definition of engagement. Even senior strategists began to question the approach. One internal review stated, Earth resists not through defiance, but through narrative inversion. Their strength is not in the physical, but in turning every tool we use into a symbol of our own irrelevance. The review was suppressed. Meanwhile, Earth expanded its influence without moving a single ship. They opened communication portals with species under Empire rule. Quietly, efficiently. They didn't offer rebellion. They offered tools. Encryption software, decentralized comms, educational archives, frameworks for resistance. Not weapons. Knowledge. The kind of knowledge that cracked walls from the inside. All this happened while the Empire's ships still hovered above Earth. The demonstration was supposed to remind humanity of its place. Instead, it became a monument to miscalculation. The longer they stayed, the more foolish they looked. Alien civilians across the Empire watched live feeds of Earth's skies, waiting for impact, for escalation, for retribution. None came. Instead, they saw humans walking dogs, attending concerts, launching memes into space, and collectively ignoring the most powerful fleet in known space. When the Empire finally withdrew, they did so under diplomatic pretense. Tactical repositioning, they called it. No one believed it. Not on Earth. Not across the stars. The departure wasn't a victory march. It was a quiet admission that force alone no longer dictated control. Back on Earth, no parades were held. No speeches were made. Humanity didn't need to declare victory. They had already made their point. In the new battlefield of perception, disruption, and psychological precision, humanity wasn't playing catch-up. They were setting the rules. And the Empire, for all its might, was starting to realize the most dangerous weapon in the galaxy wasn't a superlaser or dreadnought. It was a species that had nothing left to prove, everything to lose, and an unshakable habit of turning every threat into a stage. The Senders didn't call themselves rebels. Not yet. They were librarians, poets, outcast engineers, former soldiers turned dissidents. What united them wasn't ideology, it was recognition. Earth had demonstrated something more powerful than resistance. It had shown the Empire could bleed in public. Human response was subtle. No official messages. No public encouragement. But the replies came. Encrypted communication packets disguised as academic files. Within them, Earth provided decentralized organizational models, resistance playbooks, psychological tactics. There were no calls to arms. No promises of revolution. Just questions. What does your species fear most? What stories are you forbidden to tell? How does your empire keep you docile? Every answer built a map. Not of terrain, but of repression. Empire intelligence caught on. They labeled Earth a destabilizing force, a corrosive influence. They intensified surveillance. Propaganda units began circulating caricatures of humanity, barbaric, chaotic, untrustworthy. The campaign failed. The caricatures only reinforced what people already saw, humans as dangerous, yes, but clever and unchained. The Empire's mistake was assuming fear could erase fascination. Then the tipping point came. A mid-level Empire general defected. Not quietly. Not through the usual diplomatic asylum. She did it live, on an Empire channel, with Earth's anthem quietly playing in the background. She didn't praise Earth's technology. She praised their willingness to stand alone. Her words were clear, they didn't ask us to follow. They just refused to kneel. That's more powerful than any fleet I've commanded. Her name became a rallying cry across border colonies. The Empire cracked down. Civil liberties were suspended in several regions. Cultural gatherings were banned. Internet restrictions multiplied. But the harder they squeezed, the more people slipped through. Earth's influence wasn't viral anymore. It was generational. Teenagers across alien systems quoted human comedians. Underground clubs played banned Earth music. Philosophy forums debated human thinkers, because for the first time, ideas had teeth. Earth, still orbiting its own star, watched carefully. Its leaders didn't celebrate. They knew what came next. Influence was fuel, but it burned fast. The more the Empire saw Earth as the source, the closer it moved toward escalation. Earth's response was to redirect focus. They trained their allies. Quietly. Patiently. They taught encryption, subversion, satire. They built invisible alliances through shared ideas rather than treaties. Across the Empire, incidents increased. Minor mutinies. Digital sabotage. Sudden art movements. None of them traced directly to Earth, but every one of them echoed its signature. Resistance wasn't loud. It was clever, small, unorthodox. A painting hung in a capital city. At first glance, it was abstract. Upon decryption, it revealed coordinates and instructions for dismantling a surveillance node. The artist vanished. But the network he helped build did not. The Empire's ruling class grew paranoid. Internal investigations surged. Officers turned on each other. Loyalty screenings became mandatory. But no matter how many dissenters they purged, more appeared. Because the ideas Earth had seeded weren't commands. They were catalysts. Earth wasn't leading a rebellion. It was igniting thousands of independent ones. Some of Earth's own population grew nervous. Not all wanted to be the center of galactic unrest. But the answer from leadership was simple: we didn't ask for this. We didn't start it. We're just showing people how to think like us. That's apparently enough. In one distant sector, a former slave caste wrote a constitution. Every clause was based on principles translated from human civil rights movements. In another, a disbanded military unit began operating as a peacekeeping force, not for the Empire, but for villages caught between control and collapse. Their emblem was a hybrid of their species' crest and Earth's broken chain symbol. No one called it war. The Empire still held the fleets, the territory, the data networks. But control was slipping. Not in sudden revolts, but in apathy, in laughter, in refusal. The tools of repression still worked. But the people they were aimed at no longer flinched. Earth began preparing contingencies. Not for attack, but for what would happen when the Empire lost its grip. Collapsed regimes created vacuums. Humanity had learned that lesson over and over. Instead of waiting for chaos, they started building frameworks for post-imperial recovery, templates of self-governance, economic restructuring guides, cultural preservation models. Quietly handed off to those who asked. They didn't tell the galaxy what to become. They simply helped them imagine something else. To the Empire, Earth was no longer just a planet. It was a problem they couldn't solve. Because Earth had become the embodiment of the one concept their structure couldn't process: nonlinear influence. No central command. No obvious target. Just a species that spread not by conquering, but by making others remember they had a choice. The rebellion wasn't theirs. But the spark was. And it was everywhere now. The first true rupture inside the Empire came not with an explosion but a silence. One of its oldest sectors, long thought stable, went dark. No official transmissions. No trade logs. No administrative reports. At first, Central Command believed it was a technical failure. Then came the message, not from insurgents, not from outsiders, but from a council of local governors. We're not declaring independence. We're declaring irrelevance. Your orders don't apply anymore. It wasn't a revolution. It was an unplugging. Earth wasn't mentioned. It didn't need to be. The tone, the structure, the language, they were unmistakably human-influenced. The act wasn't violent. It was strategic withdrawal. The sector didn't burn bridges. It made the Empire look like it never had control in the first place. This was worse than rebellion. It was systemic erosion. Other sectors noticed. Empire loyalists called it treason. Dissenters called it precedent. It sparked a quiet race, not for war, but for distance. Regional leaders began calculating how to disconnect without drawing retaliation. Some used economic leverage. Others blamed Earth for influence, as if confessing infection would spare them. But the damage was done. The Empire's control was no longer feared, it was negotiated. That shift was irreversible. Meanwhile, Earth continued its campaign without claiming it. It released a global archive called the Autonomy Project. Thousands of documents, translated into every known Empire language, made freely available across interstellar channels. Topics ranged from governance without centralized control, to organizing without hierarchy, to resisting without violence. It included failed models and their lessons. It didn't promise success. It promised clarity. The Empire declared the archive subversive. But banning it only made it more popular. The documents weren't propaganda. They were tools. And tools spread faster than ideals. Especially when people were desperate for alternatives. Then came the unexpected, defectors not from the outer colonies, but from within the Empire's capital systems. Elite technocrats. Cultural archivists. Lower-tier officials. They didn't flee in ships. They leaked information. Databases, secret laws, redacted histories. Entire generations of Empire-sanctioned lies collapsed overnight. Earth hadn't hacked anything. It hadn't needed to. The Empire had infected itself with a system of obedience so brittle that the truth acted like a hammer. Humanity watched it unfold with cold awareness. They hadn't won anything yet. Influence was not victory. Collapse was not liberation. A crumbling structure often crushed those trapped inside. Earth's next step was harder: contain the fallout. They initiated what they called the Bridge Program. Volunteer liaisons, not soldiers, not politicians, connected with rising post-Empire factions. Each one carried the same mandate: listen first, speak second. They weren't there to lead. They were there to prevent the mistakes Earth had made in its own past: power vacuums, charismatic tyrants, infighting between liberated zones. Humanity didn't offer authority. It offered frameworks. How to build governments that could disagree and still function. How to protect minority voices. How to write constitutions that survived betrayal. This was what made Earth truly dangerous. Not just that they challenged the Empire, but that they understood what came after. Every revolutionary force before them had struggled in the aftermath. Earth had studied all of them, failed through most of them, and still remained. They weren't perfect. But they were prepared. The Empire attempted a counterstrike, this time not with ships, but with information. They tried to discredit Earth. Fabricated stories of hidden atrocities, claims of economic collapse, cultural decay. But Earth had already revealed its own flaws. That was the difference. The Empire hid its failures. Earth wore them. So when the lies came, they bounced off. No one feared a species that admitted it had bled. The counteroffensive fizzled. Worse, it exposed just how desperate the Empire had become. Its propaganda machine, once a terrifying instrument of unity, had been reduced to noise. A chorus of commands in a galaxy that had stopped listening. Then came the final blow. An Empire fleet, isolated during a command breakdown, mutinied. Not to join Earth, not to defect to any side, but to return home, disable their weapons, and declare themselves unaligned. Their statement was clear: we no longer understand what we are enforcing. Until we do, we choose no side. This wasn't rebellion. It was refusal. And it was spreading. In response, Earth sent a message, not public, not broadcast. Just a file, available to anyone listening. It contained no threats. No demands. Just 3 words: you are enough. It was posted, translated, and replicated in thousands of resistance forums. It became a slogan. It appeared on banners, tattoos, digital walls. For generations raised under command and punishment, the idea that identity didn't need permission was a revolution in itself. By now, the Empire still stood, technically. Its core still functioned. Its fleets still patrolled. But the fear was gone. Its presence, once an immovable weight, had become a shadow cast on fractured glass. And shadows couldn't hold borders. Humanity hadn't replaced the Empire. It had made it irrelevant. Not by offering something better. By revealing that better was already possible, if people stopped asking permission to live free. No battles. No invasions. Just one species that had mastered its own madness enough to weaponize meaning. And spread it like a signal too loud to jam. The Empire's institutions began to fold in on themselves. Not from attack, but confusion. Protocols contradicted orders. Chain of command tangled in redundant authorizations. Regions stopped reporting. Funds disappeared into black budgets that no longer existed. It wasn't sabotage, it was systemic decay. The kind no weapon could cause and no fleet could reverse. Central Command tried reasserting control, but every broadcast they issued met the same fate: repurposed, mocked, dismantled by rogue networks powered by Earth's philosophy of decentralized resistance. Humanity didn't celebrate. They intensified coordination, not domination. Earth-based AI systems monitored emergent microgovernments across former Empire territories, tracking stability, assisting only when invited. The goal wasn't conquest. It was to prevent chaos from breeding tyrants. Earth knew power vacuums too well. They had no interest in filling one. Across alien systems, former Imperial citizens began to self-organize. Earth's blueprints, revised, localized, altered to fit species with entirely different cultures, became the foundation of 1,000 different futures. Some leaned toward democracy. Others built consensus councils or rotating tribal alliances. What mattered wasn't structure. It was that people chose it for themselves. The age of permission had ended. One such world, once the Empire's largest fuel supplier, declared itself neutral. It refused to engage in trade under any hierarchy. It replaced tariffs with time-based bartering and ran its economy on collective contribution. Earth didn't validate it. It didn't have to. The experiment worked. Other worlds watched. Copycats formed. Innovation, no longer shackled by centralized doctrine, exploded across sectors once considered stagnant. The Empire attempted to interfere. It dispatched peacekeeping fleets, framed as humanitarian stabilizers. None fired weapons, but their presence alone was enough to trigger resistance. Not through arms, but through obstruction. Communication lines jammed. Supply routes diverted. Pilots refused orders and claimed navigational anomalies. The resistance wasn't human-led. It was ideology-led. Every Empire move triggered 10 countermeasures by citizens who had never spoken to Earth but had learned from its example. Within Earth's command centers, military strategists no longer planned for conflict. They planned for preservation. Not of territory or resources, but of equilibrium. They saw what was forming, a post-Empire mosaic. A chaotic, unstable, vivid future with no singular ruler. It was fragile, and that fragility was power. Earth's role wasn't to shape it. It was to protect the idea that it could exist. The next unexpected development was cultural. Species once denied expression began to produce art that went viral. Not galactic entertainment. Real art. Grief, trauma, identity reclaimed after centuries of silence. A former slave caste released a poetry archive titled "The Noise You Made Us Swallow." Within days, it reached more systems than the Empire's official education programs had in a decade. Earth didn't claim credit. They just translated it. In one corner of the galaxy, an Empire museum was taken over by curators who turned every exhibit upside down, literally. Artifacts of conquest displayed with red banners titled "Stolen." Visitors walked through halls of reversed history. Earth helped with layout design, nothing more. The protest wasn't violent. It didn't need to be. It went viral before Empire censors could react. Not all transitions were smooth. In some sectors, power-hungry factions rose, attempting to replace the Empire with newer tyrannies. Earth responded, not with invasions, but by quietly elevating locals who had credibility and access. When necessary, they dropped digital payloads of information, exposing corruption before it metastasized. Truth became Earth's most effective weapon. One drop, perfectly timed, could dismantle a dictator in days. This was the final form of the fight, narrative warfare. Not who held the gun, but who controlled the story. Earth didn't need firepower. It needed clarity. And in a galaxy still disoriented from the Empire's collapse, clarity was revolutionary. Earth's influence wasn't universal. Some species rejected it entirely, fearing contamination of tradition. Earth respected that. They didn't evangelize. They offered tools and let the galaxy choose. And that, more than anything, cemented their power, because it wasn't taken, it was accepted. The Empire's remnants tried to regroup. A last-ditch effort to unify splintered systems into a restoration coalition. It failed before it began. No one trusted the same voice that once silenced them. Attempts at relegitimization were ridiculed. Former loyalists defected in embarrassment. The term coalition became synonymous with delusion. By now, Earth had become something else. Not an authority. Not even a leader. A metaphor. The idea that resistance could be clever. That freedom didn't need structure. That survival wasn't about victory, but about refusing to disappear. They didn't raise flags. They whispered, "You already have the power." When asked what Earth wanted, they responded the same way every time. "Nothing you can give us. Only what you can build for yourselves." By now, Earth's original conflict, the insult, the ships, the threats, was ancient history. Students studied it not as war, but as the moment the galaxy remembered it didn't belong to one voice. What began as confrontation had become transformation. The Empire hadn't just lost control. It had lost the blueprint for legitimacy. And Earth, still spinning around a yellow sun, had done it with no fleet expansions, no forced alliances, and no banners waved. Just ideas sharper than steel and patience deeper than silence. Long after the last Empire ship abandoned its patrol routes, long after Imperial decrees stopped arriving and their flags were torn down or forgotten, the galaxy entered a phase no one had words for. It wasn't peace. It wasn't war. It was raw, unfinished space, a vacuum filled with noise, attempts, failures, and hope. No power stepped in to claim it. Least of all Earth. Humanity had no galactic government. No universal leadership. Just a coalition of voices, thinkers, and engineers quietly maintaining the lattice they had helped spark into being. Earth's greatest export wasn't technology or culture anymore, it was methodology. Frameworks that taught others how to adapt, self-correct, and never wait for permission again. Across former imperial territories, entire generations grew up having never bowed to the old order. Their first political memories weren't oaths of loyalty, but debates streamed over decentralized networks. No planetary anthem played before broadcasts. Instead, public channels opened with questions. Asterisk, what do you need to know today? What have you unlearned this week? Asterisk, Earth had not just changed how power operated. It changed what people expected from those who claimed to wield it. Yet Earth did not escape challenge. Its neutrality was often tested. Factions, jealous of its reputation, tried baiting it into mistakes. Some sought to prove that humanity, like the Empire, was only pretending to care. Earth's response never wavered, disengaged from control, returned to empowerment. They didn't fight for dominance. They defended space for others to grow. Every hostile probe, every smear campaign, every manipulated narrative was met with the same countermeasure: evidence, transparency, and silence that let others draw their own conclusions. That was Earth's final advantage: trust built not by force, but by consistency. In the place of an empire, no singular order rose. Instead, diversity exploded. Some species returned to ancient governance. Others formed collectives with rotating leadership. A few hybrid systems emerged, half Earth-inspired, half indigenous tradition. Friction existed, naturally. Old grudges flared. Resources clashed. But now, the conflicts happened within new rules, ones no longer written by a distant throne. Earth remained a hub, not a center. It connected without tethering, advised without commanding. In one system, it mentored artists. In another, it audited digital infrastructure. Somewhere else, it helped design a constitution for beings who communicated solely through scent and color. Each time, it adapted, translated, learned. It didn't try to make the galaxy human. It helped the galaxy become itself. The final remnants of the Empire withered in isolated corridors of space, speaking to no one, commanding nothing. Their last broadcasts were empty affirmations, rituals echoing into voids. No one responded. Even their own kind had moved on. Their collapse wasn't marked by war or rebellion, but by irrelevance. And yet, even in this new age, Earth remained vigilant. Because freedom, once planted, was not self-sustaining. It required attention, patience, and constant recalibration. Earth had no delusions about permanence. What they built could be corrupted. What they inspired could be misused. But the difference now was clear. there were others ready to resist that descent. Humanity was no longer alone in bearing that responsibility. Children born in this era would never remember what it meant to fear the Empire. To them, authority would always be negotiable, leadership always temporary, and questions always more valuable than orders. They didn't salute flags. They traced back origin points, of laws, of customs, of systems, and asked, who benefits? Who suffers? Who decides? And when they traced the patterns far enough, they'd find Earth. Not as a conqueror. Not as a savior. But as a pivot. The fulcrum around which the galaxy remembered that submission isn't survival, obedience isn't destiny, and rebellion isn't a single act, it's a habit of thought. In the end, humanity's legacy wasn't victory. It wasn't control. It was contagion. They had infected the stars with a dangerous belief that small voices matter, that chaos can be navigated, and that the most powerful kind of strength is the refusal to accept what is simply because it has always been. The Empire's greatest failure wasn't underestimating Earth's weapons. It was misunderstanding its will. You can overpower a fleet. You can silence a voice. But you cannot kill a species that treats defiance as instinct and reinvention as inheritance. So Earth remained, loud, flawed, relentless. Not an empire. An idea that refused to die.